David, the floor is all yours.
One thing you all have to remember is that I don't know your children at all. And I'm talking about charge syndrome in very general terms. I don't want to say anything that might frighten you or get you very worried, that might not actually apply to your child. So you need to remember that I'm just speaking in a general way. And I may have questions for you about your child. So this kind of issue of children becoming impatient and angry and not being able to control it is fairly typical of charge syndrome. We see this kind of problem quite often, sometimes with children who are very, very young, of 2 years or 3 years of age, very often in teenagers. And it's always a bit like being a detective, trying to, you see a crime and you have to find who is the guilty person. What is causing this problem? And it could be many, many different things. So you have to think about your daughter and think which of these things is possible. One thing, if she's 14, to me, I would think about puberty. Is she going through puberty? Many, many children with charge don't go through puberty at the normal time, and they need treatment with sex hormone. Girls need estrogen and the boys need testosterone in order to start the process of puberty, because it doesn't happen spontaneously like it should have done in your other children who didn't have charge. So it could be that she's going through puberty and that's causing these problems. We all know that teenagers, when they start to go through puberty, can become, how can I say it, difficult to live with. And that is one possibility. But with charge, another possibility you always have to think about is pain or physical discomfort. And there are many reasons why children with charge could have pain or discomfort. One of the main sources of pain is the digestive system, the stomach in particular, and the colon. Problems to do with constipation, sometimes problems to do with alternating constipation and diarrhea. And Dr. Kim Blake always says those two go together. We think diarrhea and constipation are opposites, but Kim says they usually operate together. So I would ask about her digestive system. Does she seem to have problems with food going through her system or not? Another problem could be growth. If she's going through a growth spurt, which wouldn't be unusual at the age of 14. Sometimes there's joint pain, which comes from the growing body. So it could be joint pain associated with growth. And another problem could be that most of the children have vestibular problems, which I talked about the last time I was with you on Zoom. They learn how to manage their bodies in different ways to the way we do it. And they get good at doing that. They get a good sense of balance. They don't fall over anymore. But if their body starts to grow, everything goes wrong, because they're used to the old body, which was smaller and didn't weigh so much. And as the body grows, they find that their strategies to keep their balance and organize their body don't work so well anymore. So it off the top of my head, they are the main things I would ask questions about. So pain, issues with digestion, issues with joint pain, and growth.
David, this is Julie. What about dental issues?
I think it's something I've talked about for many years is dental problems in charge. I can't remember if I mentioned that. I think I did because I always do. I've been working with Dr. Kim Blake, and we've just produced a pamphlet in English at the moment about dental issues. I don't think it's completely ready to come out yet. But the dental issues have many different causes. Sometimes if there is a cleft in the face, especially in the mouth and inside the mouth, the teeth can be in the wrong places. And then as they grow, instead of growing next to each other, they grow into each other. And as the teeth grow, the pain can become really, really intense. And in children with charge, they develop teeth at very strange times. So sometimes children are already in their teens and they still have their baby teeth. And then they start to develop their adult teeth. So things can go wrong. Children also often grind their teeth very hard as a way of keeping themselves regulated. If they get very stressed or very worried, they often grind their teeth. And when I'm often with children with charge, you can hear them grinding their teeth. You might not see it, but you can certainly hear the sound of the teeth grinding together. And that, of course, can cause problems over time with decay and cavities in the teeth. So one of the things that the Charge Foundation recommends is at least once a year, the child should be seen by a dentist. And in the pamphlet, we collaborated with the dentist on the pamphlet, and he used an expression that confused me. He said, from the age of 1 year, you should start getting the child a good dental home. And I had to ask, what did that mean? I'd never heard it. And he apologized. He said it's a dentist term. What it means is find a good dentist and get the child used to going to that office, meeting that dentist and the hygienist, sitting in the chair, so that it's a familiar place to them, which might be a big help in getting them to tolerate the dentist looking in their mouth, because we know for all children that's a challenge. And if they have Charge syndrome, it's likely to be a much bigger challenge. So they are some of the issues you might want to think about with a 14-year-old who is starting to show more difficult behavior that wasn't there before. And the last thing I can think of as a possibility, when you're 14, normally you start to worry about how you look and who you are and who's more popular than you and who's being ignored. And those issues come into play in the teenage years. And for children with charge, it's often a problem because they have difficulty socializing. They don't find it easy to make friends and maintain a friendship. And at 14, the other children around them in school are also more self-conscious about how they look and who their friends are. So they might not to be around somebody who doesn't look exactly like them, or who doesn't behave exactly like them, or who's a little slower in moving or speaking. So it could also be a problem of self-image and wondering why things aren't right for her. So all those things you need to think about and try, like I said, like a detective, you go through each of the things I've said and decide which ones are not appropriate. So her teeth look fine, her digestive system is good, but that still leaves a couple of issues which you might want to investigate. And this probably doesn't work in Spanish, but I talk about when you're working with a child with charge, you need to be a perceptive, reflective detective. In other words, perceptive, you need to observe, you need to notice, and you need to see what's happening. Reflective means you then need to think about what you've seen, talk to other people about it, and try and come up with an idea why this is happening. Is it dental issues? Is it a digestive problem? Is she worried about the lack of social contacts in school? Is it a growth spurt? Is it to do with puberty starting or puberty not starting? And that's the way it's the only effective way you can approach these issues, because the children, even when they have language, they're not very good at using it in a precise way. That, pain is an obvious one. A child is obviously in pain, but it's very difficult for them often to say where the pain, to them, it's just pain. And we want to know, is it your head? Is it your leg? Is it your stomach? And they often can't do that. And you may need to work with them on body awareness. And I know schools often use pictures, life-size pictures of a person, maybe of the child themselves, and point out on the photograph, where is the stomach, where are the arms, where are the legs, where are the feet, where's the head, to try and help the child think more about which part of their body is hurting. So there's always a lot to think about with charge. I'm doing the keynote presentation at the foundation conference, and I've been going crazy for 2 weeks trying to think what to include and what to exclude, because I want to include more and more, but in half an hour you can't do very much. So then you try to decide which are the most important things, and actually everything is important for one child or another. I don't know if that's helpful. It's difficult on Zoom to talk like this and not know whether this is relevant or not.
Sí, David, es muy relevante.
Yes, David, it is very relevant.
Muchas gracias por contestar
And
esta
thank you
pregunta.
very much for answering that question.
Precisamente
The next
algo que
question,
tocaste, dice, ella,
it says,
la misma niña,
this
es
is the
una
same
niña
girl
muy
we're talking
agradable,
about.
es muy
She's a
tranquila,
very nice girl. She's very
pero
calm,
no socializa, y quiero
but
saber
she
si es
doesn't
con-
socialize.
Yeah, again, this is, I have to say, all the questions I was given are very familiar questions. This syndrome, people with charge are all the same and they're all different. You have to remember that they are all different, but so often they begin to look all the same with these issues. And it's always a question, especially when the children become teenagers, why don't they socialize? Why don't they have friends? Do they want friends and they can't get them because the other children of their age, like I said, don't want to be with them? Or many of the children don't actually want friends. They are loners. And I think it's important, if they want to be loners, to accept that. It's a choice for them. Sometimes the choice is forced on them because they don't hear very well, they don't see very well, they can't keep up with language with their peers very easily. Everything is too quick, and it's coming from too many different directions. And also physically, they usually are not as able as their peers. So they can't keep up with their peers when they are walking, or when they're moving around doing things, or when they're playing games. So it's hard to know, if a child doesn't want to socialize, is it because they would like to, but they just can't make it work? Or is it because they genuinely are not interested? And I know adults with charge who are, they have one or two friends, but they're not very sociable people. They're very nice people, but they're not into socializing in a big way, and they're very happy with that. And it's important not to, parents often say to me, it makes me very sad because my husband and I have lots and lots of friends, and we're always socializing, and we want our daughter to be the same. But your daughter isn't you, and you have to try and think, is this being forced on her, or is this her choice? I've seen some schools use what they call a buddy system, whereby I used to work with a boy who was about, I don't know, 11 or 12 in a mainstream school. And they asked the students, how many of you would like to be his buddy for like one day a week? And so many of the students wanted to be his buddy that they did it in half days. So they had 10 of his classmates who would each be one would be his buddy on Monday morning, somebody else on Monday afternoon, somebody else on Tuesday morning, and so on. And their role would be to be with him at that time, and literally to sit with him, to communicate with him, to work together with him, to try and remove any feeling of isolation, social isolation. And that might be a possibility. But it's not, I noticed when the question came up, I could see Julie was smiling and nodding, because this is such and Alexandra as well was smiling and nodding. This is such a typical situation that we see. And I also find many children with charge socialize more easily with adults than with their peers, because adults will stop and listen and have a conversation, where other 14-year-olds want to be off and doing things and talking about clothes and music and I don't know what, television shows, which often don't mean anything to the child with charge. And it's one of the issues. Somebody like Casey Stratton is very, very interested in the adult group. I'm an early intervention specialist. Tim Hartshorn is a school psychologist. Kim Blake is a pediatrician. Our training is all in childhood, but Casey's really got into the adult side of things, and a lot of her work is done on helping adults with charge socialize and learn how to socialize and think about structures they can use in order to build some kind of social circle of friends, or even maybe just one friend. But I do think your question Lucia. Could it be because of her condition? Yes, I think absolutely it is.
David, this is Julie. Could I just add a couple thoughts?
Yeah, sure.
One is for a lot of these kids, it really is up to the educational team to not just be thinking about the academics, but thinking about social supports. So I loved the example you gave of the buddy system, but there's many things that teachers can do to help children make these connections because it doesn't happen automatically. And also friendships evolve over time. I just heard today on a radio program that they say it's on average, you need to spend 34 hours with someone before you move past that kind of acquaintanceship kind of relationship to a friendship. So another thing is to really think about interests. So think about things that your child's interested in and look for other children who have similar interests versus trying to have it be the student that perhaps sits next to them in class or the student who wants to be the helper. Really look for things that they're interested in because that's what friendships form around. And then the final thing I always tell people is it's quality over quantity. If you have one or two good friends, that's really important. You don't have to be friends with everyone in the class.
Yeah. And to go back to what Julie said about sharing interests, lots of children with charge almost develop an obsession with something. I know a boy in Australia who is obsessed with trailers. I think you call them trailers. In England, we call them caravans. Where you tow it with your car and you live in it, and it has a kitchen and a toilet and everything. He has many, many model trailers. He has every catalogue from companies who sell trailers. He's in a club online for people who love trailers. And a girl I know also in Australia, she is obsessed with sharks. And she took me to her bedroom, and hanging from the ceiling was a model shark about 2 meters long, about six feet long, and posters and photographs of sharks on the wall, DVDs of sharks, books about sharks. And she also, her mother had put out a request for any children who loved sharks, and it really worked. 2 other children made contact with her, and online they were able to correspond about sharks, for hours every day. So finding somebody who shares the same interest as your child can be unusually powerful with charge, because for them it isn't just an interest, it's an obsession. All of their skills are built around that obsession. And it's often technology. It could be a car, it could be airplanes or helicopters, but it could also be cats or rabbits or something like that.
Thank you, David, for the explanation. I don't have any more of questions that I received, but we sent them some to you.
Okay.
So you can go ahead and use those.
Do you know the reason why some people with charge have mental retardation and others do not? I think, first of all, we shouldn't think about mental retardation as a thing, like a virus. You can have measles, or you can have polio, or you can have a seizure disorder, but you don't have mental retardation. Mental retardation, or whatever you want to call it, is a result of the way you have developed or not developed. And there are many, many reasons with charge why a child's development won't be a normal progress. It won't go in the same direction as normal, and it won't go as fast as normal. So most of the children will not develop to the same level as their peers who don't have charge. But there are so many anomalies in charge. There are so many things that cannot be working properly that there is an enormous variety in the population. Like I said, everyone with charge looks the same in some ways, and everyone with charge looks completely different in other ways. And depending on what anomalies the child has and how severe they are, that will have a huge impact on whether they develop well or whether their development is very, very slow and delayed. And there are certain anomalies that are more serious than others. And obviously, if a child is completely blind, that will slow down their development more than a child who has some useful vision, even if it's not normal vision. If they are profoundly deaf, that will slow down their development, especially their social development and their language development. If the child has severe heart problems, even with surgery, but they still have these heart problems, that will probably lead to a very high level of fatigue. They will get tired very quickly, and that will make it much more difficult for them to pay attention and to keep going in the same way that their peers are going, both physically and mentally alert and paying attention. They tend to be the big three: vision, hearing, and the heart. But also, if there are severe breathing problems, that can hold back development. If the child is hospitalized a lot, and we know children who are born and rushed to hospital, and they're in hospital for the first 2 years of their life. And a hospital, however wonderful the hospital, it's not a good place for babies to develop all the kind of skills that we want them to be developing. Even with modern standards of developmental care, they are still in a very strange environment that's nothing like the real world and a real home. So there are all sorts of reasons why some children might be very, very delayed in their development, and other children might be doing really well. And then another feature would be the home situation. If the parents are both working in full-time jobs, very tired, with all sorts of issues about money and the quality of the home, if the house or the apartment is not a particularly healthy one because of things like damp, those things will have an impact on how well the parents can involve themselves with the child to encourage that all-round development. And then, of course, there's the whole question of the professional services which are available. If that blind child doesn't get good services from a visual impairment agency, it will slow down development. If that deaf child doesn't get good deaf teaching from as early as possible, and so on. And then if the child doesn't go to a really good classroom, and we all know, unfortunately, the reason people like Julie and I earn our living is because it's very difficult to find a good classroom that will fit well with a student with charge syndrome. So they need help from people like us to change what's available and create something more appropriate. And I always say, for your child with charge, the right classroom doesn't exist. It has to be created. There might be a good school around, but even that school has to be helped to make everything fit with your child. They won't be able to access learning from what's already being done in the school unless there's a very similar child with charge already in the school. And like I say, even two children with charge of the same age could be very different in terms of what they need from their education program. So it's a very confusing syndrome. It's one of the few syndromes where you can go to university and get a degree with charge, or you can become an adult and be in a wheelchair, wearing diapers, being tube fed with no expressive language. And you have charge. And this causes a lot of confusion for people. They often say, well, he can't have charge because he's going to university. Or they say, she can't have charge because she's in a wheelchair. And I know 5 children with charge who don't use a wheelchair. And people want to see a kind of standard charge picture. And it doesn't work like that. It's too complicated. But it's a good question. And one of the things I've talked with Julie and Tim Hartshorn, Kim Blake, Rob Last, all my colleagues. What do you look for in a baby who's 6 months old that gives you a very positive feeling about how they will develop? And I could give you a little list, but some useful vision, some useful hearing, parents who are not worn down with work and worry about where they're living and how safe they are, and a good team. If at the age of 6 months that baby already has good professionals coming into the home, you can start to feel more optimistic about the future, but you can still get it wrong. I'm watching on Facebook 2 boys I've known since they were tiny are now going off to university. And I have to be honest, 17 years ago, I had no idea they would be going to university. And I'm glad I didn't know that because, it's wonderful to see it happening. Good question.
Thank you, David.
And the next question. In adult life, how do you usually develop socially? Work, partners, or autonomy? Our son is 22 years old and works in a school library as an assistant. Well, I've talked about this a lot already, about developing social skills and building social friendships, which can be very difficult. The thing I like about your question is that your son is working in a school library as an assistant. And I think, wow, I wish more 22-year-olds with charge had jobs like that. And I always think librarianship sounds like a good match with someone with charge, particularly because you have to be obsessive. A library has to be organized. Everything has to be in the right alphabetical order and in the right place. So it really appeals to the charge mind. The other thing that's often a good match is anything involving animals. I've seen so many children, particularly when I was still working in England, who ended up working in a dog grooming place or in a hostel for animals, and places like that. And I know children who went to college to do, in England we call it animal husbandry. I don't know what you call that in America, where you learn about looking after animals. And it's not a good match because physically the child is not very strong. You have to be able to lift animals onto tables and things. So they switch and they go into the agricultural nursery and they work in some form of agriculture, not in a field picking strawberries, which is physically very hard work, but something to do with agriculture. So again, I can only say if your son hasn't really developed very, very strong social links with anyone, doesn't have a partner, does he really want that? And if he wants it, there is literature around. And there are people in the charge field, especially Casey Stratton, who will be she's always at the foundation conference, and she always deals with adults. So there are adult groups now at the conference. They have interpretation, English, Spanish. So that might be a possibility if he could get to a conference. And these things, there are also adult groups online now, which meet, I think, once a month. So there are possibilities.
David, this is Julie. I was just going to mention that there's a lot of adults within the Facebook groups and also these other monthly meetings. And some of the adults that are in the group are Spanish speaking as well. And they're so supportive of each other. They have such great ideas. Some of them come up with really heartfelt, difficult questions about things like that, like wanting to have a partner or how to make more friends or find a job. And it's good to see them getting responses from other adults with charge, I think.
It's interesting. I'm trying to write this keynote. And when I'm doing something like this to a big audience, I used to be very worried that I would offend parents. So I had to be I have to choose my language and be very diplomatic. Now I'm writing it, I'm worried about offending adults with charge because they will be in the room listening and watching, and they will have opinions about what I'm saying. And they're not shy, they let you know. So it's very healthy for us professionals to know that and to be aware of it. We are being watched and listened to.
Muy bien.
The next question, this is really a medical one. I want more information about digestion, the gut, the stomach, and the brain connection in children with charge, and if there is any relation to involuntary movements. Well, first of all that business of digestion and the stomach is very much a medical issue. And that's where Dr. Kim Blake is, I would say, probably the leading specialist in the world in charge digestion. And I see we already have a link to her website in the chat box. Of course, it's in English, and I don't know what of her work has ever been translated.
David, this is Julie again. I looked, there are some German translations on her website, but so maybe we can work with Kim to see if we can get some Spanish translations of these brochures, because that would be helpful.
She's producing a series of little brochures, one of which is on digestive issues. And I've just worked with her to do, as I said, one on dental issues. And we've done another one on scoliosis and kyphosis, where the spine curves forwards or sideways, which is quite common in charge as the children grow. And I've said to Kim, of course, they're in English, but we really should think about these being available in Spanish as well. But, we're only just getting the English ones established, but they are coming. And then the rest of your question, Well, to go back to the first part about the digestive system, Kim Blake talks often about children with charge, the brain isn't communicating with the stomach properly because of sensory problems, especially with the vagus nerve, which is the biggest nerve in the body. And that nerve is quite likely to not be working properly in charge, just like the other cranial nerves. And it could, I notice you link digestion, the gut, stomach, and the brain. And I'm glad you put the brain in because it shows you already know those things have to go together. I don't know that there's any relation to involuntary movements. I think there are often digestive problems, like I said, of constipation and diarrhea. There's also a problem of migraine. You know, I used to think migraines were just headaches. And if you had a migraine, the pain was always up here in your head. And I learned from Kim 30 years ago that you can also have a migraine in your stomach, where the blood vessels constrict and get too narrow, and the pressure, your blood pressure, pushing through those narrow veins creates pain. And we see this in children quite often. They wouldn't exactly be involuntary movements caused by a abdominal migraine, but you would get cramping and curling and a lot of upset, angry, upset, pain responsive behavior. Involuntary movements in charge usually are tics. They're more like tics. And you may have seen tics, especially facial tics, where the head might twitch like this. I probably shouldn't be imitating tics since I'm not a specialist. But those things can develop, and they can be associated with multisensory problems, but they can also be the result of stress and anxiety. They would be, in my experience, the most common involuntary movements. And tics can come and go, which suggests that they're more related to stress or possibly some kind of imbalance in the diet that the child is getting. And then there's the next question is also a digestive question. How is it best to support the digestive system? Do they need any extra supplements? And again, that I would have to leave that to the doctors to talk about. And as I'm sure you all know, many young children with charge are tube fed. They're then fed through the nose on tube and then through the stomach with a gastrostomy. Sometimes the gastrostomy lasts into adulthood. In England, I knew a boy, he was about 23 and still had a gastrostomy tube, but he did it himself. He used British Sign Language, so he could sign very fluently. When he was having his lunch, he would organize the tube and everything, and he would hold the tube up and he would adapt his sign language to one hand. And his sign language would change, and he'd use his face and his mouth and bits of his body. It was just brilliant to watch. And then he could go and he'd mastered the hygiene side of tube feeding. And he wasn't self-conscious about it. I remember he said to me once through his mom, who was interpreting for me, he said, well, I'm fine with lunch because it's coming through a tube, but everybody else is going, and they're putting things in their mouth, and it looks horrible. I thought, yes, he's got it worked out. Very smart.
Very smart, yeah.
The next question. I would like to know if you know of any history of motor problems, especially in the lower limbs, gait impairment, and if it has anything to do with the lack of estrogen. If you think that this treatment can work for lack of development in a 21-year-old girl, well, there are several things in that question. I've already mentioned delayed puberty. And if you talk to a doctor who specializes in hormones, who would be an endocrine specialist, the one I know is a British doctor, and he says in charge, most girls go through puberty, but a little bit late. Some of them need treatment with estrogen to make puberty start. Most boys don't go through puberty unless they are given testosterone. And they need to go through puberty for a very important reason. If you don't go through puberty at the right time, your body starts to increase your bone age much quicker than normal. And what that means is, if you don't go through puberty, say by the time you're 17 or 18, you are starting to get an advanced bone age, which could lead to osteoporosis, which, we're familiar with that in older people, especially older women, but it could happen to you as a teenager or a young adult. And that's the main reason why we want children, if they don't go through puberty spontaneously, we want them to have hormone therapy, estrogen for girls, testosterone for boys. And I don't know if this 21-year-old girl has gone through puberty, but you mentioned treatment with a possible lack of estrogen. That should be investigated by an endocrinologist, and there might be a need for estrogen treatment. I know I've talked to many parents over the years where there's been a recommendation that their child needs sex hormone therapy, estrogen or testosterone. They don't want to do it because for a girl, if you give them estrogen, they will start to develop periods. And it's easier if your daughter doesn't have periods. But of course, it's also very dangerous if your girl doesn't have periods because of the problem of osteoporosis developing. And with boys, they don't want testosterone because that will increase the boys' muscle mass. It will increase their physical size and their strength. And it may also make them more aggressive. So I can understand why parents are not always happy with going into the hormone therapy, but there are very good long-term reasons why it really should happen. And then the first part of your question, any history of motor problems with the lower limbs or gait impairment? I wouldn't think that comes from a lack of estrogen necessarily, though I'm not a specialist in hormones, but I do think motor problems in the legs and gait impairment are almost universal in CHARGE syndrome because of a whole range of issues to do with low vision, vestibular difficulties, so poor balance, breathing difficulties, possibly on medication that causes drowsiness, medication for heart problems or for seizure disorder or something like that, which can make the child drowsy. So it's even more difficult for them to resist gravity and sit up and stand up. Standing unsupported is a very, very big milestone for children with CHARGE. Even when children can stand unsupported, they often run. And people say, there's a saying in English, don't try and run before you can walk. But it's a stupid statement because we all run before we can walk. You think of, young children when they're ready to walk, they run, they fall forwards and they run quickly, and somebody has to catch them. And it takes time for them to slow down and walk. And that can be a very slow process for people with charge. They learn how to move around by sitting up and scooting on their butt, or they roll, or classic is to lie on their back and push with their feet, and they slide backwards on the floor. And they often have a bald patch on the back of their head because they've been rubbing it on the carpets for a long time. And sometimes those patterns of movement are much safer than trying to stand up and walk. And the children benefit a lot from seeing a good physical therapist and possibly a good occupational therapist as well to give assistance with standing and walking. Sometimes a walker can be a very positive thing, but I know physical therapists who don't like walkers because they say it doesn't encourage the right movement patterns. But I think if a child is 4 and the only way they can be upright and moving is with a walker, I'd give them a walker, because we have to think of their self-image and their self-esteem. And there's research from England from 50 years ago. A woman wrote a book that had a huge impact on me. She went into mental handicap hospitals in England, and she noticed children who were lying down and couldn't stand got much less attention from the staff. Children who were upright, even if they couldn't walk, but they could sit upright, people talked to them more, people touched them more. So, if a therapist says, well, the walker won't encourage the right movement patterns, we have to have a conversation about what can we gain with a walker that would be lost if the child has to keep scooting around on the floor. So I don't know if that's a good answer for you, but I do think the way you state it is classic. Motor problems with the legs and gait impairment. And there's classic charge gait, where the children often have their feet wide apart. Sometimes they slide the feet on the floor. Sometimes they stamp the feet before they step to make sure that the floor is there and they can feel it. They tend to sway side to side. And I think sometimes they exaggerate the swaying in order to go to the safe point where if they go any further, they'll fall over. And it keeps their brain aware of, don't go too far that way or that way. Sometimes they clench their teeth to give them a better sense of where their head is, or they pull their shirt up. They pull it up and they hold it in their teeth and they bite down on their shirt to give them a better sense of posture and balance. And sometimes they do things like they clench their hands in front of them. I've seen children who do this and they look at those fingers and they follow the fingers, and that keeps them upright and stops them falling. You have to look at all these behaviors and you have to notice them, because they are sometimes the only things that tell you about the child, because the child can't tell you themselves. So you have to be that perceptive, reflective detective all the time. And nothing they do is too small or too insignificant to give you a clue about what's happening. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 more questions here, and it's 5:30, so we're doing okay, I think.
Doing great, David. We're doing great.
I know I'm doing all the talking. I hope that's okay. I mean, I can talk all night, so that's not a problem for me.
Tú eres el experto. Tú eres el experto.
Might be.
And Myrna, it looks like there might be one question that came in the chat too. I want to make sure that you guys
Let me
it's
see.
in Spanish. So
Somebody asked a question here. Somebody who has the title Samsung. Would you be able to rewrite that in the chat, please, again, so we can understand? We're not really able to understand your initial question you asked.
And I'll go on with these written questions,
Yes.
but we'll keep looking at the chat box.
Mhm.
Here's a school question. My son is in a regular education school, but we are having problems because he hits the teacher. Sometimes he hits his classmates, he throws things on the floor, and he runs out of the classroom without any explanation. I don't know how to regulate him. What tools can I give him to improve this type of behavior? Again, I can see smiling and nodding. This is a familiar situation.
Mhm.
In my experience, it happens more often in regular education classrooms than in special education classrooms. And I think it relates to a couple of things that I've already talked about. The first is overstimulation. There might be just too much happening in the classroom, too much movement, too much noise, too much talking, and this boy might be very, very overstimulated, which could easily cause these behaviors you describe. It might be also poor self-image, where he's not keeping up. He can see other children doing things and achieving things and, putting their hands up and answering questions. And maybe he's not able to do that without supports. So I would say what he really needs is somebody like me or Myrna or Julie or Alexandra or Lourdes or somebody familiar with charge going into the classroom to support the classroom staff. And I would see it very much as supporting the staff. You don't go in and say, you're doing everything wrong. Even if you think that, you go in and you're there to help them and make their life easier, because obviously their life isn't easy with this boy showing these kinds of behaviors. Sometimes you can do quite simple things. Sometimes if you move the child's seat to a different part of the room where they can see better or hear better, or they might be in an area where people are moving around, if they can be moved close to the wall so there's nobody moving behind them and they can see everything in front of them, that can help. If you're lucky, that can make a big positive difference. But sometimes it needs a lot more than that. And I would want to know, does he need a teacher of the visually impaired to help change the educational materials so that he can actually see better what they are being given to do? Or does he need sign language, for example? Or should he have hearing aids and is he wearing them? Could the teacher wear a radio aid so that he can hear exactly what the teacher is saying to people more easily? Does he need regular breaks, physical breaks? Sometimes, again, I've seen it work really well, where I've said, is it possible for this girl, the class was, this was a girl with charge in California, the class was sitting for an hour while the teacher talked to them. And I could see the girl getting more and more uncomfortable and stressed. She needed to move. She had her one-on-one aide with her. And I said to the teacher, can you make up reasons why you want this girl and her aide to go to the office and come back? Can you say, oh, I need the attendance register. Can you go down to the office together and bring it back? And if the girl could move every 15 minutes or so, she didn't need to move a lot, but she would come and sit down and she could sit more comfortably. She wasn't slumping. She wasn't stamping her feet and holding on to the chair. She also needed a better chair with armrests, so she felt physically more secure. All those kinds of things, if I was in the classroom, I would be looking at those things and thinking about them to see if they could help. I don't know if this boy has a one-on-one aid or if that would even be appropriate. But if a child with charge is going into a regular education school, I think you always need somebody from outside to come in and help and give advice. No regular education school can just take a student with charge and do everything right. They are too complicated and they need special things. Sometimes very simple things, but they do need it. And one of the things I'm writing in my keynote is there's always a danger with students with charge. People will start to think the child is doing their worst. You know, they're a problem. They're sweeping things off the table and everything. If you can think that child is doing their best, but all these things are going wrong, it puts you in a better position. It puts you in a positive state of mind to adapt and to help them be more settled and more attentive. And I hope that makes sense. But, you know, I'm used to going into schools and I hear he's very disruptive, he's very lazy, he can be very naughty. And I instantly think, whoa, we've got to completely change the way they look at this boy, because all they're doing is looking at these behaviors as bad behavior, where actually these behaviors are coming from a student who can't keep up, who can't do what's being asked of him, and who needs help, who needs regular breaks or a better chair or a more appropriate place to sit or material that he can actually see and all those kinds of things. So fostering that positive attitude, like not this child doesn't belong in this classroom, but this classroom hasn't yet provided everything this boy needs for him to be able to work effectively, but we can do it. And that's important.
David, this is Myrna.
Yeah.
David, soy Mirna. Tengo dos preguntas en el chat. Pero
I have two questions
creo
from
que
the
la acabas de
chat.
contestar,
Okay.
Pero quiero
I see that some people just answered.
leerla de todos modos. Dice,
I
mi
still
hijo
want to read
está
them.
escolarizado. Este año tiene
One
6
says,
años y
my
empezó a buscar
son is in
apoyo.
school. He's 6 and he started to hit his teacher.
Nuevamente es comportamiento de lo que se está hablando aquí.
And then we're talking about a behavior here then.
Yeah. And everything I just said
Yeah.
about this
Yeah.
boy applies again.
Es lo mismo que estabas, por eso dije que quería.
It's
de
the same thing you
todo-
were saying. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to bring that up, yeah. To
La
emphasize
siguiente
what you were
pregunta
saying.
es,
The next question we have is,
mi hijo tiene 5 años, pero
my
tiene mucho
son is
retraso
5,
mental.
but he has a lot of mental delay.
Aún no logra imitar, no sigue.
He still can't imitate or he still can't mimic. He doesn't
Aunque
follow
ya-
instructions,
Aunque ya logra poner atención.
even though he is managing to pay attention.
Esto es normal con niños con charge. a
Is
esa
this
edad.
normal in kids with charge at that age?
Yes, it's not unusual. And again, the trouble with imitating people and following instructions, it puts pressure on the child, and he might not be ready for those things. I see people who maybe they introduce some signs and they're saying drink, drink. And I've been in schools where at drink time, all the students get a drink. And the child with charge, they're saying, sign drink. And they've got his drink in their hand. And the child's reaching for the drink. And they won't give it to him because they want him to sign. And that is a really bad way of teaching language. If the child recognizes his drink and reaches for it, you should be thrilled and say, oh, you want your drink. And you work on language in functional ways rather than as this mechanical, you have to do what I want you to do, otherwise you won't get what you need. And with a drink, you're entitled to the drink. So, it's difficult. I don't know the boy. I don't know the situation he's in at school. But I would say I would work on all sorts of play activities and things like turn taking. And a lot of children with charge like physical contact. So I've often built a relationship with children, even when they're 5 or 6 years old, where we sit down and we rock. I hold their hands and we rock together. And then I stop and let go, and they have to reach out for my hands. So it's like a conversation, but we're not using words, we're using movement together. Or kids who like to be younger children, you can pick them up and you can bounce them. Boom, 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 and then you stop. And they have to vocalize or look at you or tap you or kick their leg. And that's their part of the conversation. So you've got right away from imitating words or following instructions, and it's just play. It's two people together having a good time. And that's how you build the relationship, rather than making the child imitate things, because that might be way too difficult. Both intellectually, they might not be ready, but also, can they see what you're doing, or can they hear what you're doing? And are they able to imitate? Do they have the movement and the body control to do it? And the boy I'm talking about in England who reached for his drink, he couldn't actually put his hand like that and do that. It was too complicated for him. But they didn't understand that because they didn't understand the syndrome, and they hadn't really understood the boy and what level he was functioning at. So this, yes, it's not unusual for a child of this age. And it goes back to what is the educational program expecting of him? And it sounds like it's expecting way too much, too advanced, and they need to come back and make it more appropriate. So like the last question, it's about making they're trying to make the boy fit the program, but you have to make a program that fits the boy, because that's the only way he'll learn. And the big tragedy is, if you try and make the boy fit the program and he can't, you say, oh, he's too disabled. He's too mentally retarded. He needs to go into a different class where they don't put pressure on. You get all these things being said, where actually it's because the program is wrong for the boy. And then one about how can we identify the child's visual field? What activities help to map that information? That's a good word, map the information, in order to adapt and provide the necessary support and adjustments. Well, the vision specialists are the people who should be able to do that. sometimes I or Julie can do it just by observing. You get an idea that the child is maybe blind in one eye. They see things this side, but they don't see things this side until they come forward. Or you can see a child doesn't see something when you hold it still, but as soon as you move it, they see it. You can do that kind of vision assessment, but really it should be a teacher of the visually impaired who looks at the visual field, and the vision doctors, the ophthalmologist, and the optometrist. They should be the ones to give you a better idea of what the visual field should be. But I have to say, in CHARGE syndrome, when the ophthalmologist does a clinical evaluation of the child's eyes, they predict what the child's vision will be like. And then the child has much better vision than they predicted. That would not be unusual. And that is one of the wonderful mysteries of CHARGE. And I put it down to an ophthalmologist can examine eyes. They're used to making predictions. What they can't examine is that child's personality. They can't examine their character. They can't examine the family and the parents' expectations of the child that push the child and his family push him to use the vision he's got much better than the ophthalmologist was expecting to happen. And it happens a lot. You go on Facebook and a parent says, I've just been told my baby will never see anything. Parent after parent writes and says, they said that about my baby. She's now 6 and she sees almost everything. Or with glasses, she sees everything. Or with glasses, she sees everything within about 6 feet. So it depends. So
David, this is Julie. If I could just add, I know we have people here from a lot of countries, so I'm not sure if your vision teachers do functional vision assessments, but what's helpful with those that's different than an ophthalmologist who's just looking at how the eye is working is they'll talk about things like those motivators, and the conditions that the child can uses their vision, and at times when they're not able to use their vision very well. They'll talk about what types of supports help their vision. They'll talk about behaviors that the child figures out and uses to improve their vision. So if your teacher of the visually impaired can do more than just tracking, but actually do a whole functional vision report and really talk about how your child is using their vision and what conditions they need and things like that, that's would be most helpful, I think, as a parent. Yeah.
David, this is Mirna.
Quiero leer la pregunta
I want
que quedó
to-
pendiente de Samsung.
The question that came in earlier from Samsung.
oh yes.
Dice, vamos a ver. Dice, voy a tratar de leerla bien.
I'm going to try to read it.
Pueden tener características de TDAH.
Can CHARGE have characteristics of ADHD or ADD?
Y si se le puede dar clases de
And the next question,
¿qué tanto se recomienda?
and if there are classes on those topics, how much would you recommend them?
This again is a question we are asked a lot. Most children with CHARGE are diagnosed by somebody, and it might be the grandmother or the next door neighbor or the lady in the supermarket. They're diagnosed with ADHD or autism or OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And they do show behavior that's similar to those things. But classically, when you assess ADHD or obsessive compulsive disorder or autism, those children don't have Charge syndrome. They don't have vision impairment. They don't have heart defects. They don't have breathing problems. They don't have abnormalities of the skeleton. They don't have severe vestibular problems. They don't have hearing impairment. So you're taking an entirely different kind of child and diagnosing them on the basis of what you would say about a child with none of those things, which to me doesn't make any sense whatsoever. If they're showing behaviors like autism or ADHD, it's because they have Charge syndrome. Now, there are some educational strategies used with ADHD or autism that might be quite helpful with a student with Charge. But you have to be very careful because ADHD strategies and autism strategies might be completely the wrong thing to use with a child with Charge. Just because their behavior looks like autism doesn't mean that it is autism. They've got the behavior for completely different reasons. So you do need to be careful. The problem is everybody's heard of autism and nobody's heard of Charge syndrome. So people always jump in straight away. And this, I've been arguing about this for over 40 years. You know, autism is something else caused by something else. This is Charge syndrome, and we're talking about Charge syndrome. And as Tim Hartshorne says, if the child looks as if they have autism or ADHD, remember, Charge syndrome is enough all by itself. It's such a huge syndrome. It involves so many parts of the child's body that you don't need to look for another problem outside of Charge. We can explain those behaviors by Charge syndrome. And there are strategies. I mean, there isn't time. I see it's almost 6 o'clock. There isn't time to go into them, but there's literature. There's plenty of literature out there. And I'm sure Julie and Myrna know much better than me what's available in Spanish. Julie told me some of the Intervena modules are available in Spanish, or
Yes.
all of them.
All of them. And there's a very good one that was developed for behavior and environmental supports, and it talks about things exactly like that. So, and there's a lot of there specifically they use children with Charge because, well, you and Tim and Casey were some of the developers of that
we
module.
wrote-
But yeah, we can make sure the group gets that link.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's important. But again, we're getting all the kind of questions I've been getting for 40 years, which is good to know, because it means, you know, there aren't huge things we don't know anything about because we've never come across them yet. We don't always know what to do, but we're familiar with the problems and the questions. And then we can end with this wonderful question. Well, I can't use cuss words here, but I want to. What would you say to professionals who lose patience with children with Charge for being insistent or repetitive in some of their behaviors, children who need to have control in certain situations? And I would say FO, if I can put it that way, to use an old English expression.
They do talk about that in the behavior module, though. So again, that behavior module
Yes.
would be good because
Yeah.
they talk about the need for control that's a human instinct. So yeah.
And one of the issues most people with Charge have to learn to live with is lack of control of their own world and their own lives. They've always been surrounded by people who know better than them what they need. And one of the themes of my keynote, if I can put it into 30 minutes, is, the child will show you what they need if you bother to pay attention. If you put pressure on them, they may well hit you or sweep things off the table or run out of the room. But if you're prepared to genuinely observe them to see what they do, what do you do when you're all by yourself, moving around the room or rolling on the floor? What are the things you like? What are the things you give yourself because you seem to need them? That then puts you on the right road to think, what can we do with this student that will be genuinely helpful to them? Rather than, let's introduce sign language and make them copy it, which isn't what they need at all.
David, soy Mirna. Muchas gracias. Tengo una
David, this
pregunta
is
para finalizar porque
Mirna.
nos queda un minuto,
I have just one thing to finish up because we only have a minute left.
pero
Yeah.
creo que es muy importante.
But I think this is an important thing to mention.
¿Nos puedes dar un consejo o
Could you
sugerir
give us any advice
cómo comunicarnos eficazmente con el
about
equipo
how we can
escolar
communicate effectively with the teams
No.
at school
si no se ve ningún progreso con nuestro
if we're
niño con charge?
not seeing any progress with our kids who have charge?
Yeah. Again, that's like the $1 million question because it comes up again and again. I've been in IEP meetings where school district people have shouted at me and told me I have no right to ask those questions. I remember a chair of an IEP meeting saying, "Who are you? Who do you think you are?" And I thought, my God, I can't believe this. And you actually do that with the parents sitting next to me. It's just appalling. And I think having an advocate with you, there's a lot of debate about this. Some parents say, go in with important looking books with colored bookmarks in, so it looks like you've done a lot of work on the law and educational programming, and try and make them think you can't be lied to. Other parents, we know a parent, Jackie, who used to go in with food. Every planning meeting, every IEP, she would bake a pie or she'd buy some cakes, and she'd go in and she'd have a bowl of fruit, and she'd thank everyone for working with her daughter, and she'd thank them for being in the meeting. And she felt that was the best way to get them listening to her and what she wanted. It depends on who you are. Some parents go into a meeting and they just want to cry even before anyone says anything. And they really need an advocate with them who can speak up, who's familiar with the whole process of the IEP, and who can go in with literature. I always say to parents, here, you've got these articles by me and my colleagues. Go through them with a highlighter pen and mark the really important bits and give them out before the meeting. And then when you get there, you can say, well, I sent you the articles. You didn't have to read a lot because I highlighted the key things, and see if that helps. But sometimes those district teams make all the decisions before the meeting, and they go through the meeting because they're legally obliged to, but they've already decided nothing will change as a result of the meeting. Then you go to I did online support for a child in Chicago last year, and I got more and more involved with the parents. And I said, we really need the school team. The school was more than willing. They allocated a whole hour, and I was stunned. The Zoom came on, and there was about 20 people, the mom and dad, the program specialist, the superintendent of the school, the vision teacher, the deaf teacher, the physical therapist, the school psychologist, and they all had questions for me because they wanted the program to be a better fit for the child. And I was thrilled because I thought, boy, I haven't seen this very often in a long career. It is a big, big problem. And there's all sorts of literature out there, but the approach has to be a good fit for you as a parent. You know, our colleague Jackie couldn't have gone in and got angry and insisted on things. She had to be charming and polite, and it worked very well because her daughter got a really good deal, including as an adult, a very good deal. But the next parent along, I mean, another parent we know, Sandra, she disagreed very strongly with Jackie. They were good friends, but she said, these people are being paid to work with my child. They're supposed to be trained, and I expect them to do their job. And I'm not buying them a cake because they're being paid to sit in the meeting. I remember the two of them. We were drinking wine, of course, but I remember these two moms having such a good time arguing because each of those moms was picking the way that suited them and their personality.
Thank you very much, David.
Toda la noche. Nos encanta
I know we could spend the whole night here. We love hearing about all of this.
Yes.
I have to take my dogs out to pee.
Quiero darte las gracias por
I do want to
darnos
thank you
tiempo,
for giving us your time.
a las mamás que mandaron, a los padres
Thank
que
you to the
mandaron
moms
las preguntas,
and the dads who sent in questions.
a Julie por
And thank you to
apoyarnos tanto,
Julie as well for supporting us so much. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you to the interpreter.
Yes, thank you, Andrew.
Que pudiéramos hacer sin ti, Andrew.
What would we do without you, Andrew?
Gracias,
exactly.
David. ¿Algunas palabras que tengas, Julie o Alexandra, para David?
Are there any questions that Alexandra Julie has for David?
No, just thank you so much, Mr. Brown. As always, it was excellent.
Please remember, if you have a child with charge, you're part of the charge community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very powerful community. My goodness, I'm so lucky that I'm part of the charge community and I'm not a parent, but it's very strong, very passionate, and there's a lot of very smart, informed parents around, and they are remarkably generous at sharing their experiences.
Muchas gracias.
Okay, off to my dogs. Good luck,
Nos vemos
everybody.
en Phoenix, las que vayan a ir.
Thank you, David. Good luck, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches, David.